Our memories build tomorrow's stories. Remembering is resistance. Our Afro-knowledges tell stories is the theme of the Cumbre Afro 2025, brought to you by Centro de Investigación y Archivo Digital Afro, a Center for Investigation. In the framework of remembering and resisting, joining our conversation today, we have Yvonne Weeks. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yvonne Weeks is a UK-born writer, a theater director, and educator from Montserrat, actor, and a published writer of prose, poetry, and drama. She is also the author of the book Volcano, a memoir following the aftermath of Montserrat's Soufriere volcano. Thank you once again for joining us. Firstly, we wanted to thank you so much. Our first invitation before conversing is to connect with your memories and make them present. So we always like to start by asking how your first years of life were, your family environment and community contributed to your fight against racism.
How my first...
Yeah, how your first years of life, your
Oh, as a
family environment.
child?
Yes.
Okay. So I remember the only fight I ever had in my entire life. I might have been 6 years of age at primary school in London, and a little girl called my brother a very horrible name, a very racist word. And I remember kind of tugging her around the playground. I was very little, but she was littler, and all her little golden locks falling on the playground floor. And of course, I also remember, even at college, being the only Black student that studied theater, and walking with one of my very best friends who was English, and being spat on by. So I've had very dramatic and traumatic memories of the UK, some of which I haven't really explored in my writing as yet, but I intend to go back to them, yes.
And in a recent video, actually, in your social media, you explained how you were very close to a bookstore that sold many Afro books. And was that your first introduction to Black literature?
Oh, absolutely. I am at an age that doesn't need to be said on social media, but I didn't study any Caribbean literature at all at university. But my secondary school, and when I would come home for the holidays and weekends and stuff, was close to New Beacon Books, which was started by John LaRose, who's now deceased. And I spent like hours in that bookshop, just plowing through. At first, it was mostly African-American writers that I was reading, Tony K. Bambara, Sonia Sanchez, Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, and then I was introduced more formally through my cousin, who was also a playwright, to Edward Kamal Brathwaite and Tom Austin Clarke and other writers. So yeah, but the bookshop saved my life, I think. And I actually have a poem in my collection called How I Fell in Love with My Black Men. It was literally the writers of the region that I fell in love with as a young woman.
Would you like to read it for us?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. If I can remember what page it's on. Okay, page 47. For John LaRose, who's the owner of the bookshop, who unwittingly saved me. I didn't like white books. Sitting in the light of New Beacon Books, I fell in love with my first Black men. Imagined the Bajan voice of Kamau, caressed the warrior men of Lovelace, laughed at Calendar's boyfriends, stood attentively to Clark's Union Jack, rejected the iambic pentameter of those other men, all dead. Wished Mama could have fallen in love as I did. In the corner of New Beacon Books, the men beckoned me, breaking sense into me. So that's from my collection, my very first collection, Nomad.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, it
Thank
was.
you.
I loved it.
So I want to go back a little back to theater because I'm also studying theater, and the spaces where Black people for Black people on theater are very very limited. So I wanted to ask about how was that experience on London, especially since we have this image of London being Shakespeare and everything and very white, and we all look back to that London of that experience of what London theater is, but it's also a very, very, very white and maybe
Homogenic,
yes, yes,
right? Okay.
and yeah. Can you explain that a little bit?
So for me, that might have been my experience at college and at university. But once I left, that wasn't my experience. So there were a number, I grew up at a time where Black activism in the arts was high. And so I always had access to amazing, phenomenal Black playwrights, Black theatre productions, Black feminists. So there was a company called Munira that did amazing work looking at racism and misogyny and how Black women engage in the racist space. There was a Black theatre collective. I actually did a narration for a film called Hands Worth Songs, which was a Black film collective, the Black Audio Film Collective. They did a film that explored a lot of the riots in London and the racism and the police brutality. And so I was very engaged in that community, and I didn't feel that wasn't my lived experience. In other words, there was so much happening in Black writing. I did a film which was written by an amazing visual artist and playwright, Michael Macmillan, who's still doing amazing work in London to this day. So there's always been, and while it did exist on the fringe, perhaps, independent film and independent theatre companies did a lot of really good work. And I feel blessed and privileged to be in London at a time where we were alive, we were awake long before the word woke came into being. And so that wasn't my experience. However, we also knew that there were limited opportunities for Black performers. So I actually started teaching drama, and I did do some acting for a little while, but I didn't want to play no hoes and no maids, if you understand what I'm saying. But there was also a time of energy and life. And when I left London, because I didn't want to bring my son in that space, bring up my son in that space, I knew that I was leaving a very rich space of theatre, and I still see evidence of it today because I go to London every year and I still see evidence of that. So that's my experience.
I love that because here at the university, at least, that's not the theater that we're exposed to, and I would love that we will have that other side of the theater, and especially make more spaces for Black people and trans people also to be in the theater and be able to engage, feel identified with what they're seeing, because here it's like a very whitewashed.
I think that's a shame because it suggests to me that nothing much has changed.
Yeah,
and I've actually retired from theatre in the sense that I've retired from being a full-time professor. So that's a shame because I think we were going in a direction, but life is very cyclical, and it's unfortunate that you should experience that. Now, when I taught theatre at the tertiary level in Barbados, I taught at the college and I taught at the university, and we were always interested. I was interested as a lecturer to ensure that Black stories, Caribbean stories, and Caribbean histories was what my students were exposed to. They were also exposed to Beckett and Stoppard, and they were exposed to Brecht. They were exposed to Athol Fugard. I directed Suzri Banzi is Dead. You know, we've just lost Athol Fugard recently. But they were also exposed to Caribbean writers. So one of my books that I've written, and I'm sorry I don't have a copy of it here with me, is a collection called Voices, Dramatic Monologues and Text for Caribbean Actors. And there are 35 dramatic monologues in that book.
Amazing.
Which is used across the English-speaking Caribbean. And I have to figure out how to get it to you guys, whether through Dr. Loretta or whoever. I'm going to get the book to you. Because that book, there are historical monologues from Jamaica, from Dominica, from Montserrat, from Grenada. We've included a monologue about the 1937 riots, labor riots in Barbados. We've included some folklore, cultural traditions. And even like a couple of weeks ago, a teacher in Antigua messaged me and said, I've got some videos for you. And she sent me videos of the work that her acting students were doing from that collection. So I think this is an opportunity, and I think what Cumbre is doing is amazing, because this is an opportunity for us to talk to one another, for the English-speaking Caribbean to know what's happening in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and vice versa, which is why the book that I've co-edited with another writer has 52 writers, and we've included writers from Haiti, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Antigua, Montserrat, St. Vincent, Guadeloupe. When I produce work, it cannot just represent the English-speaking Caribbean. I'm really sorry that my Spanish is horrible. I would love to be able to speak, more. I can read a little bit more, and I can read more, and I can understand basic in context. But I think it's time for us to have more communication, more dialogue, because you should be aware of that book. That book is a very important book. Disaster Matters. 51 writers from across the region, and Loretta Collins Clover is in that book as well.
Oh,
yeah.
I would love to have it.
Which I co-edited. Yeah.
It's amazing. I would love to have that book.
Yeah.
Now that we're speaking about experiences, you have this book called Volcano. Through hardships and the Afro-Caribbean experience, how do you begin to narrate your memories and the memories of others?
I think it's a difficult process, and I'll be very honest with you. This is kind of an accident. It was not intentional. This is how sometimes life makes choices for you without you realizing it. So when I moved to Barbados from Montserrat, I left England, I went to Montserrat, then the volcano erupted, and I went to Barbados, and I was like, oh. What happened was I met Kamal Brathwaite, and everybody should know Kamal Brathwaite's work, whether you're French, Spanish, Dutch, or English speaking. And he said, you should write about it. So I started to journal, but I journaled very intermittently. Some months I didn't write anything, and it tended to be triggered by an activity. So when my school in the south of the island that I'd gone to for a term, or not a term, a year, but was burnt to the ground, then I wrote. Or when 19 people died in the volcano, then I would write. And then eventually Kamal said, but put it together. So the thing about memory is like you gotta arrange it. And you don't know what is really memory and what is imagination. Sometimes the lines become somewhat blurred. So I started to really write in earnest. Not with the intention of publishing, because at the time when I started writing, my son would have been 12. And by the time I kind of finished it, he would have been at university. So then I entered it into a literary competition, one of our biggest competitions. And I won the first prize. I was broke, so I needed the money. It was $10,000, so I needed the money. But what I found then was that I had to go back. Did this really happen this way? How come I forgot that memory? And so sometimes, just like a good researcher, I started to cross-reference. So I'd call my girlfriend in England and say, do you remember where we were when that particular eruption happened? Were we in Trinidad? Where were we? That sort of thing. And then, so the thing about a memoir is that, like other Caribbean writers, you're writing about home, but you're not home. And that's the thing that struck me when I started to look at other writers like Jean Rhys, George Lamy. They were always writing about home, looking back. And so how do you look back? Through rose-tinted eyes, through nostalgia, or through bitterness, or through sadness. So all of those affect the way you express your memory. But it can only be your memory. And so I'm very unapologetic that it may not be the way someone else experienced it, but that's the way I experienced it.
Mm-hmm. And also, as an educator, what advice would you give to young people going through hardships in their countries and struggling with their cultural identities?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the last question part first, the cultural identity. So that's been a struggle for me. So when I started writing, I was described as a Black British writer. And I would grimace because I am a Caribbean writer. And where I live is irrelevant because for me, home is something that I made the decision about what is home to me. And while there's some regrets, or not really regrets, some loss, because Montserrat is very mountainous and Barbados is a flat island. So there's that loss. The real loss has to do with people, people who've passed away, people who left the island at a time when we didn't have WhatsApp, when a phone call to the England or the US was extremely expensive, where you didn't know where your sister left to go, or, it was very hard. So I spent a lot of time curating my identity. I'm very honest about that. And my space in the world is not going to be determined where I was born. It's not going to be determined by the fact that I didn't do Caribbean theater or literature while I was studying. You are not going to define who I am. So very often people ask me where I'm from. I ask, why? Why do you want to know? Why is it interesting? Who I am is a mother, a grandmother, educator, a writer. And I could move to Puerto Rico and have to learn Spanish. And that's fine. But I think we have to decide who we are, make that decision and not allow anybody to put labels on us. And as an educator, I think we need to read more. I feel we need to read more. I started rereading 100 Years of Solitude the other day. I got nothing to do. So I'm halfway through it, started to reread it. I'm not going to reject any experience that's offered to me. So the University of Lublin in Poland invited me to come read to their students. I'm like, okay, what does the Caribbean have in common with Poland? And I went and researched, and I was like, the Polish soldiers went and helped Haiti. Oh, we have much in common. We have so much more in common than we have differences. And so for me, I think we have to be intentional about who we are. We have to decide. And sometimes the literature has helped me. So Kamal's Arrivants, which is another great book. I don't know if I have it here, but that book helped me because it's a book about migration, about movement. It's about loss, about how you define home. And, there's a great cultural, he's the father of cultural studies. He's passed away now, Stuart Hall, Jamaican. And he says, none of us are in a place that is our home. I'm paraphrasing. We're all of us in a home that's not really our home, right? Whether through slavery or colonialism, or in my case, as a result of environmental crisis, I ended up in Barbados. But ultimately, there's a beautiful Somali poet whose name was just left nobody leaves home if it's safe. If there's fire, you're going to get out of the fire. You don't put your children, her poem said, you don't put your children on a boat if the land is safe. I'm really sorry I can't remember her name, but it's such a beautiful way for us to understand who we are and our cultural identity. And so as an educator, I was an educator for 45 years, I tell my students, read this. Why don't you read this? Why don't you watch this film? Why don't you look at this documentary, right? I am a woman who, despite I have 3 grandchildren, I am constantly desperate to learn and to understand and to know and to be and to become every day a better version of myself. So that's what I would say to them.
Well,
I
last-
really
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that reminds me so much of this one video of people saying what they would take from their homes if it was in peril, and it's a very powerful imagery. And lastly, we want to enrich our archive with memories, but also with recommendations. So if you have a book, a film, or a song that you would like to recommend us, that would be it could be a song. Yeah.
I love everything that is Bob Marley. And I would definitely recommend that students read the work of Stuart Hall. I would definitely recommend reading my book, Volcano. Kamal Brathwaite is definitely someone we should read. There's some beautiful poets, Lorna Goodison, Olive Senior, Anthony Joseph, Kai Miller from Jamaica. I mean, I'm Kwame Dawes. I could go on and on and on. I read a lot, and I think that's the answer, really, to enrich your life.
Well, thank you once again for being our guest and for joining us here for this conversation. Truly, thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us that remembering is resistance.